All right, guys. So obviously we're living in a unique moment in history. And the big question that I want to explore together is, how do we propel evangelism forward in this environment of social distancing? When public meetings are banned, when you can't have more than 10 people getting together, how do we move evangelism forward? All right, so this morning we have Byron Corbett. He's the pastor, senior pastor of the Richardson Seventh-day Adventist Church in Texas. And just by doing that, I'm getting myself in trouble because I'm not going to remember everybody's church. So we also have Richie Halversen, who's in the Georgia Cumberland Conference in Tennessee. Keith Trumbo, who's also in Georgia Cumberland. Where are you, in Columbus?
Yes, Columbus, Georgia.
Columbus, Georgia. And then finally, Joshua Plohocky, who's in Pennsylvania Conference. Hey, how long have you been in Pennsylvania, Joshua?
I just got here. I've been here since July, so not too long.
Okay. Great. And I chose the four of you because we've done multiple events with each one of you, and every one of you is bringing a unique perspective to this conversation. So I wanted us to talk together and just hear each other and allow each other to influence each other, and just what's going on out there. So Byron, you're in the middle of some meetings. Let's start with you. What can evangelistic meetings be held exclusively online?
Well, if I didn't say yes, I'd probably be lacking faith and, innovation. So, they probably can. I think there are some challenges to that. And I really think that we probably need to figure out how this could work. I will also tell you, I'm probably the oldest evangelist on this call. I'm, a little over 50. So, I'm still of the sort of mindset that, man alive, in-person stuff is really the best value and,
right,
and where things happen the best and you get decisions. However, unless we're able to work in this digital environment, I think we're going to lose huge opportunities too. So what I've done in my meetings right now is Tuesday evening, just before they prohibited gatherings of over 10 people, we had our meeting, and we've got, we had really 15 top quality interests coming out, really excited, night by night, not even letting all the coronavirus stuff stop them. So it was just, heartbreaking to have to say, man, we're going to have to shut this down. But I had taken the time to think through it, and I talked with them after the meeting saying, if we're going to pause these temporarily, we're not going to stop them. We're going to pause them until we can pick them up in person again. But in the meantime, would you be interested in us continuing our studies in Daniel and Revelation via Zoom conference? And if so, will you give us your email? So we've gotten emails from all these people, and we're going to continue our meetings twice a week, Saturday evenings and Tuesday evenings from 6:30 to 7:30. And I'm going to kind of walk them through and work them through the lesson guides that Voice of Prophecy put out to go along with the meetings, and just add some other valuable content to keep them engaged. And then trying, as such a time as we can, pick back up where we left off with the evening preaching, because I don't know that you can necessarily preach the same way over video conference. I've never tried that. I'd be curious to hear what some of these other guys think about that. But there is just something about the intensity of passionate preaching that gets people into God's Word and gets them convicted and excited. So those are kind of my thoughts right now.
Keith is one of the few people that I know of who's actually tried to do an evangelistic webinar. And this was, seems like about a year and a half ago, right, Keith?
Yeah, and my wife, Ann, is here, and she's been the one that has actually done the webinars. and successfully been able to connect with people in the community. It is a different format doing just a webinar online. We found that a shorter, more direct format works well. We've also had the same challenge in getting people from a Facebook ad to actually attend. The same challenges that we've had with getting somebody to attend a live seminar at our church. Say we might have 65 people that would sign up as a pre-registrant for our meetings at the church. This last spring in a meeting, we had maybe 7 of those 65 that actually showed up, and 2 of those continued like 3 or 4 nights. Mm-hmm. So the retention rate and the ability to get into the community and have somebody translate from signing up for either a webinar or a seminar that's live, getting them to actually participate has been the greatest challenge. And then when we have been able to have them participate in a webinar only, we've been able to use the best format, a shorter format, 30 minutes, something that is quick and a little faster paced. That's been helpful to us, but it's not like there were huge numbers for people that signed up for webinars. That has not been the case.
I remember the first one that you guys did being a little bit more successful than the other ones. Was there a reason, or do I have that wrong? I thought the first one did pretty well, and then we tried a couple other ones, and then the topics were a little bit more focused on certain things, and they didn't do as well. Is that true, or?
Yeah, we did a series of a number of different webinars, and I think the first one was more successful, not from Facebook advertising, but from people that we already knew.
Yeah.
That was the key that got people online. See, but then we went through the people that we already knew, so to speak.
They've already been there, done that now.
And so we're trying to connect with new people with the subsequent webinars, and that was where we didn't gather in as many people. So if we're talking about gathering people that you already have a relationship with, that has been very successful with a webinar, somebody that you already know. But if we're talking about gathering in absolutely new people that you've never met and taking them from a Facebook or social media contact to a webinar, that has been successful, but the numbers are not stellar.
Well, and one of the interesting things we've seen on our side, and I'll agree with that. The interesting thing is, though, that we now have a direct look at what those numbers look like. And I think it's one of the things we've talked about with pastors a lot, is that when we look at something like direct mail, you do it, and then so many back in the day, and then people showed up, and that number of people is what you got, and you were happy or you were sad. It is what it was. Once you start getting registrations, you start realizing there's people that take the next step, but they don't take all the steps.
Right.
So you start seeing 60, and you go, oh, that's great, but it turns into 7, right? But in the real online, world out there, it's something I think we're all going to have to come to terms with, because you do want to engage and capture information at different points, but there is a level of dissatisfaction or frustration as we see numbers go down. In fact, sometimes with Facebook, we don't even share some of the numbers with the pastors, because you start looking at conversion, you're like, oh, 8,000 people went to your website, and then 40 of them signed up.
Right. Yeah.
And they're like, that's the most disappointing thing they've ever heard. And I'm like, but when you actually consider the cost and all those factors, it's
absolutely.
But it's so, yes, I understand that perspective, and we're always trying to figure out how to widen the funnel to capture at least some amount of information early on. But we see those numbers on our side, and I'm shocked sometimes. Yeah. When you see how many people can go to a website but not actually give you information.
Oh yeah, it's staggering. I can imagine. Yeah. One thing that was successful that we tried later on was very interesting to see as we changed formats, as we went from a Zoom meeting where you have to, take those steps, and it's pretty simple for us, but I think we lost some people just in the translation of signing up, or they didn't want to give the information as they signed up for Zoom or something. Just Facebook Live.
Yes.
It was pretty interesting that we were able to gather in a number of members, more members that were just probably trolling around on Facebook or online, and they joined the meeting. So we were able to gather up a bigger meeting, even though it's 20 minutes or 30 minutes, as we used a Facebook Live format instead of a Zoom format. That seemed to be helpful.
Well, and that leads to what I was wanting to say, and that is that I think that advertising is not a problem. I think we're great with the advertising. That, creating the funnel is, I think we're good at that.
Mm-hmm.
SermonView has really got a good grip on that. The question is then the conversion, always. And that's always the issue for us. What we found with our live meetings is that we'll get a lot of registrations online. Thank you, SermonView. Maybe 2 of those people will actually show up at the meeting, but we'll still get the same number of people that registered. They just didn't register.
Yeah,
they want people who register.
How that number seems to work.
It's just so that shows community interest.
Sure.
So I suspect there's a similar dynamic online. So the question, I think, has a lot to do with platform, not so much advertising, because if we can put it on a platform that's readily accessible, where people can join without having to download a special program or sign up, or where we have to send them an invitation to come and they have to download something onto their computer, where if there's a platform where they already are, then I think that we might have a better success rate.
Yeah.
So have you guys thought about, because that's good stuff. I'm curious because, I think for my side, I think the goal is always to capture a certain amount of information so that in the future you can continue a conversation with them and hopefully transfer it to a physical, coming through the doors of the church, Bible study, what have you. And so with Facebook Live, you see that number ticker down there and they'll give you those demographics, but you can't actually get any of those people's information.
You'd have to have a person watching and jotting down names pretty much.
Yeah.
But actually, I have thought with the last thing that we did on Facebook Live, I've thought that would actually be an excellent thing to have as a second person who is the webmaster, so to speak, the person who can actually interact in the chat with the participants, because people are online asking questions, saying things, even just saying hello, that's something that I started doing, is just telling people, I say, I don't know who you are unless you say hello. If you'll say hello, then I'll say hello back. And it just helps. I don't know, people are more likely to respond to that. And we've gotten actually a pretty good bit of response, not 100%, but maybe 30 or 40%, which I think is pretty good. So where people will actually respond in the chat on Facebook and say hello. And that way I do have their name and I can interact with them at that point.
Well, you have their name. So how do you guys interact with them? I mean, you don't have
on Facebook.
Yeah, you can Facebook message them.
And that's the thing, that if we're really thinking online, it needs to be all online, at least for a good while, until you've developed some kind of relationship with people. Now, the problem, of course, with Facebook is that it's harder to restrict your geographical territory. So you may have someone on your Facebook Live presentation from Africa, Italy, Jamaica, Brazil, Canada, and you're in Georgia. You're not going to be going over to their house. You're never going to have a face-to-face relationship with them. That doesn't mean that the gospel is not being spread.
Sure. Yeah, that's the balance, right? The relationship, and then also just getting the word out.
So if I could just comment on the first question you threw out there for us, Larry, was can evangelistic meetings be held exclusively online? I think the answer to that is no. I mean, I think they can be done online, but here's why I say that. And Vince, I'm sorry I haven't gone to your website and filled out the data on our meeting yet, but I was just waiting to get through, the weekend really and see how everything panned out. But so, yeah, we had about, I think just right at about 30 pre-registrations online for the meetings. 4 of those actually became bodies through the doors. Okay, so that's the challenge, as we've all talked about, is getting people to take that next step. However, we still had about 30 guests from the community come through the doors.
Right.
Which means the direct mail drove most of the in-person response, more so than the online stuff. It was direct mail that got people out. And so if we just go exclusively online, those direct mail people are not going to be showing up, I don't think. And so I think it always needs to be a both and approach.
Right. I wanted to say a little bit here. As I look at this, I think, one, this is an opportunity for us, and we should look at it as an opportunity because God says he's going to work all things together for good for those who love him, and this is a very challenging time, but it may be what we need to give us that boost to get our online capacity up to where it should have been anyways, and to work that in together with our interactive, hands-on. That's always the best. But as I was listening to you all, I heard that the best response on the online was from those people that we knew. And I come from a sales background, and that's probably the number one thing you're supposed to do is you find out the people that you're close to, and then you ask for referrals. And I see this, and where I was going to be trying to channel my membership is that a lot of times it's hard for them to invite someone to our meetings or invite them, because they may know people or been praying for people, but they're kind of afraid of what's going to happen. This could be an opportunity where we could say, hey, this is non-threatening. This is a non-threatening option. We have the ability to do this. Why don't you refer them to our webinar or to our group and, let them check it out that way. And I see that as a potential if we work our base and say, okay, who do we know? Let's start there. And then those people, how was their experience and who could they recommend? And we work it out. I feel like we could be successful with this. We're never going to be super successful with the mass strangers out there. I mean, we can reach them to a certain degree, plant seeds for future and other interactions. Right. But I think our best success is always going to be what Sister White told us, which is we need to look for the fruit that's closest to us. And we often neglect that. And I think this is an opportunity for us to focus in and channel it. While everybody's home, everybody's scared what's going on. If we can channel them in and say, look, are you enjoying the opportunity to stay in touch through Zoom? Who else do you know that may be, benefited by this? And then we'll send them a personal invite. We'll give them the instructions. And the nice thing with Zoom is they don't have to download anything. They can just call the number in and not use anything through Zoom. And so if we make that real simple, Zoom likes to put 10, 20 different numbers. Maybe we just take one of those. Right. They just call this number. I think we could make this a simple process, especially if we're all working together and all our minds are doing it. Maybe one of us comes up with an idea, it starts to work, we share it. And that's one thing I feel is that we need a better platform for sharing. We're great at getting that one superstar who pulls it off, and then we all get to hear from them and feel guilty. But at some point, we need a good avenue of, hey, let's forget about ourselves and let's find avenues of how can we share the resources we have and what's working. And that's what I like about this meeting is I feel it's really coming together and seeing, okay, what are you guys doing? Some of you have had some experience. Some of us are just at the beginning of this. Why don't we merge these ideas and find a platform of how to share it?
Amen. I agree. Well, just in a summary fashion of what we found is that in using the social media platform to get people into a webinar or even a Facebook Live meeting, I mean, it's still just that basic cycle of contact and try to develop a relationship with people. Right. That is just key. So as we develop a relationship with people online, that is a different dynamic that we may not be comfortable with. It's pretty labor intensive, meaning that if you do develop a relationship with somebody where you might meet them and they say they have a Bible study interest through some sort of Facebook advertising. Well, taking somebody that you just met from a Bible study interest and exchanging emails, getting them involved in short online Bible studies, that works much better than some kind of a long format, but it has to look great. And then getting them to go through, say, a series of 3 online Bible studies, and then having them go on to part number 2 and do another 3, but you're interacting with them and giving them feedback. Hey, you finished lesson number 5. That was great. We're so glad that you did that. But just trying to interact with them, whether it's on Facebook or whether it's through email or even text. As you grow that relationship, it's going to take time. It can take 4, 5, 6 months to develop a relationship with somebody just online. To think that they would go from, a Facebook ad to a webinar to a live meeting, meaning that they would come to your church, is a huge jump. But we can develop relationships with people online where the goal would be to get them into a Bible study or get to know them, where they would actually come and attend an online webinar that would be short. After they attend an online webinar, then have the goal of getting them to actually come to something in person, either a special church service or something. But that whole process could take 6 to 8 months. And there would be, hundreds of emails with one person over that 6-month period. It's still based on relationships and building relationships, but it's just going to be in an online format before you ever meet in person. That's what we have found.
A couple things that we have found. We're streaming, we are Facebook living, we have our YouTube channel. And, just as far as for the local context, especially from a pastor's perspective, is even though there's a lot of content out there, when the local pastor is sharing his content online, the members, they enjoy sharing that. And so it's just like anything else. It's the word of mouth. They're going to share that. So it is going to get to your local, demographic. You're going to get to those people who are in your community, because our members know people in the community that aren't coming to church, and they're sharing those things with them. And so that's something that we have found to be, super effective. And the more tools we have, the better. I think in person is always best. The incarnation of Christ was the Word became flesh. People have to need to reach out and touch the gospel. But I think that we can do meetings completely online. I do believe we can do it. I think that we get into trouble when we approach things, and I do think online is just a tool, but that's going to become more of the norm. Whereas the meeting in public meeting, and hey, I do a couple public meetings every year, and I love them, but that's not going to become the norm. It may get back to that eventually, but the reality is, our norms are changing, and so I think that we can do the meeting completely online. What we have found, like with our Bible workers, is to do Bible work just as a way to get people to my meetings. That doesn't work really well. They found that when you start Bible studies with people in home, it's best to meet them there and do the full study with them there. And yes, you might bring them to the meeting to make the decision, but that basically we shouldn't treat the in-person, in-home Bible study as just a means to our public series. Exactly. It should be the method in of itself. Yes. And so I think as long as we treat the online just as a tool to feed our previous methods, we're not going to see the results that we could see if we did just embrace it. And I'm with Byron on that. I'm not an either or. I'm everything. Give me every tool in my tool belt, because everything reaches different people. I've been trying to get my church onto more digital things and this text messaging service. And let me tell you, explaining how to work an iPhone for my 70-year-old plus members, it's harder than explaining the 2,300 days to a non-Adventist. It's horrid. So that may never be the method that we use to reach some of the older people, and the public meetings is certainly, we know, primarily reaching that group of people. And so I think that's something to kind of keep in mind. What we have found with social media, that less is more, that consistent and quality is more important than quantity. And of course, that's with anything. And so with my posts and my church's posts, we have gone to shorter, a little bit more engaging, once a day type of stuff. I'm doing a short little 5-minute devotional thought that I'm calling a dose of hope. And I'm getting more shares from that than we were even getting from our sermons that we're streaming online. So I think if it's going to be online, it's got to be short, 5 to 10 minute max. TED Talks, minus 10 minutes. When you see some of the other churches, TD Jakes and some of these big personalities on Instagram, it's just a 2-minute little snippet that grabs their attention. It's got to be quick. It's got to be poignant. It's got to be powerful. And then that gets people then to go to the website, and they can check out all the stuff that they have. And you hope the end result of that is going to eventually, they're going to step inside of your church. So I think it's got to be short and to the point. I still believe in person. It still has to end there with someone, not in a digital baptistry, but in a physical baptistry. But those are things that I know that I've discovered. Engagement online is as important as anywhere. And, we've got to be able to follow up with these people, connect with them. But I think if we create a good quality product that's, right to the point, it gets the message, I think we can see a lot of good results from this. And yeah, the reality is we're because of this problem, we're being forced to do things that we really should have embraced years ago. And so I think we just take advantage of this while we have their undivided attention, not just throw stuff up there because people have to be at home, but let's create something that's going to be good for the long run.
I think that's interesting to see that. Can we build an online community of members? That's an interesting perspective. Is the end goal going to be have them sitting in a chair or a pew at our physical location, or can we just build online community? I think the answer to that is yes. So I think that's a good point. We could have, could we have 100 members that are just attending the streaming service, and that's how they attend? They, of course, hopefully would be involved in other ways, but can we grow the church just with online attenders?
Sure. What are some, I guess also, Richard, could you share a little bit more on, some of the process you went through to create some of those, higher quality, better videos, short things? What are you doing? How are you doing that?
So I'm just on, we have slowly been building onto what we started. First, it was just streaming on our website, and then we started doing Facebook Live because that cuts out more steps. The more steps you can cut out, the better. And now our YouTube channel, we're trying to generate subscribers and make some improvements there. So we're just kind of building on that. Look, I'm busy, so I can't just be producing tons of content constantly for different things. So my little dose of hope, it's not that special. It's just me recording myself in my office and sharing. I would say the content is polished and good. It's not just me, talking about my day and what I'm going to eat. It's something that gives people hope and something that they want to share. So there's not much polish to that. But what we hope to eventually do with the sermons. So here, we put 20 some hours into writing a sermon, and then, we get one Sabbath off that. No, man, let's take that sermon, and we're hoping to get to that point. We're not yet there. We're in the process where we can take that video, we can edit that down, put in some of those little highlights, and you use it as kind of a promotional again, I don't know if you've seen it on Instagram or if you've seen it on some social media, some pastors will do that where you're seeing a snippet of the sermon and then that drives them to watch more. They can click on the button and go to the full length message. And so that's what we are in the process of doing right now. But then the actual thing that I'm sharing, the dose of hope, that is something that I'm just doing with a good camera from my desk and just trying to make that as engaging as possible.
Okay, thank you.
One of the other thoughts that, I'd like to throw out here is if we can develop a system better following up on the contacts that are generated that would feed into building that online relationship, because here's what I want to suggest. We got 30 registrations to the meetings. Now, most of those people gave either a phone number or email address or both of those. Now, even though 26 out of the 30 didn't show up at the meetings, we still have contact information for them. Mm-hmm. And I think that if there were some valuable content that maybe it is like a little dose of hope thing, but it's content that each of us can take and record ourselves so that it's us, but then we could send it out to all of those people. And if we could invite them to other events, in other words, take advantage of the information that we collected, even though they never showed up, but keep touching them, eventually it could turn into a person showing up to something.
Right.
Well, is it a tacit agreement or permission for us to email them if they give us their email address? I mean, do they have to say, I don't understand. I know there have been some new laws and regulations lately about sending out,
privacy policies,
privacy laws, things like that. Can we do that? I have assumed that we can.
Yes, you can. The privacy policy allows for you guys to continue communication with them.
If they
I get it.
You can't sell the list. It has all those things, obviously, but as far as your ongoing communication, you can do that. So I just wanted to address this idea of follow-up, because one of the things, when we collect a registration, when you have an online interest, when somebody requests anything, what we know about them now is a little bit of who they are. That's their proclivity, their interest, their intrigue in the subject, those kinds of things. But what we don't know, or what they don't know necessarily, is who you all are, or why listen to you, right? There's so much information out there that somebody, by registering for an event, is saying, this is intriguing to me. I like this concept. But the difference between them not showing up and showing up has a lot to do with, credibility. And that's something that has to be built online in those other ways. And like you were saying, Richie, like when you constantly are putting out little pieces of content and people kind of get to know you, there's a comfort level, with you so we're sending out, whether it's a flyer or an online advertisement, we're saying, hey, this is the big subject. This is the meaning of why you're on the planet. And you can listen to us, who you've never heard of, tell you what the answer is. And there's a certain number of people that go, great, I'm ready to hear that answer and I'll take it. But there's also people that, may register because they're interested. They certainly didn't register for any other reason than the content looked interesting. Unless it's a fake registration, which we look, and it's actually very low. I'm actually surprised how low the fake registrations are. So then it's a question of, right, how do you continue to communicate with them in a consistent way that just allows you to be that credible voice in their experience as they walk through this understanding or this question that they have. And so I think that is where we're trying to communicate with the churches, and we don't have the answers because content is a big deal and it takes effort and time, and none of you all have that. So I appreciate your thoughts on this. But there is a point where we have to continue those relationships from those registrations, from those pieces of information and contact, so that we can help them not only understand what we're going to talk about, but why there's value hearing it from the place that you're coming from. And that is part of the challenge of this sort of funnel as we go through it. So I would like to see those names and numbers as opportunities to start reaching out with more contact points and just trying to build some relationship, through those. And I do think that when I talk to pastors, it's sort of because everyone's busy. It's a set aside. Maybe at the very end, we'll send an email that says, "Don't forget to join us," but it doesn't really build anything. And so I think figuring out what that looks like, what it looks like to have that ongoing communication in a way that builds relationship online, always with the goal of converting to physical relationship. And it is time consuming, like you said, Keith, as well, just because the amount of content you have to do, an in-person conversation, a 5-minute conversation can build long, deep relationship for the next, week or 2 or 3, so that someone will come back and connect with you again. Online, you have to make that touch, 4 to 5 times every year.
When I did something similar to what Richard was saying, and we haven't got it to daily yet, but we're working on that. Some of the feedback I got was they loved the content, they loved all that, but they said, man, we really need to have better backdrops. It needs to look better and more polished, especially if we're going to reach, our church they're going to accept what we send. They're going to share it to their friends. Yes. But, to really reach the online community, 5 minutes in front of our computer is not going to cut it. With the technology we have, it's not gonna spread the way we want it to spread. It's got to have a little bit more flair to it.
I do agree with that statement. I will say, especially with some of our younger people, that authenticity is more important than polish. So, and you can have both. So I'm not suggesting we can't have both, but I've seen some more polished backgrounds where it looks like it's in a studio, but then it's not. And so, it can look really cheesy fast is what I'm getting at. So I think there's a balance, and some of the best stuff that I'm seeing out there as far as snippet content is where someone is preaching or teaching, and these are live shots of that, and then it's been edited and compiled and condensed into a 2-minute thing. And I think what is very polished is the cameras, the angle, the look of the whole thing, and all that is very polished. So I think we do need to do that. But I think also, that the content and the polish has got to go hand in hand. Otherwise, it just won't work.
Yeah, the biggest challenge that we've had on the technical side of it is a great example of what you're seeing of us today, and that's lighting. Lighting has always been a challenge, but you can buy some great LED lights, which we don't have set up right now, for about $100. They come on stands, and you have to be able to work with them to not create shadows, but you can get a place set up in your home or something with a nice background. But the biggest challenge is just lighting, so you don't have funky shadows, you don't look weird, you don't look strange. One other thing on the cycle of contact, through the webinars, we amassed an email list of over 500 people, 500 to 600 people that attended a webinar or pre-registered, and we really worked that as a cycle of contact through over and over and over. And we didn't really see a big increase with those numbers. So it's not that I don't believe in that cycle of contact, but I do think that to get to the success level, we'll have to have thousands of people within our contact list. And so that would take really a team within the church instead of just something the pastor is doing as a ministry himself. But if, say, there were a couple of thousand, 2,000, 2,500 people that were new people that you've met through online advertising, I think that would, over the process of time, through connecting with them, produce results.
Well, and it's definitely a game of time and numbers when you're talking about online to some degree. Keep in mind the quality, again, of the, I think one of the things, and that's why we really haven't gone down this road, the social media side outside of advertising, because advertising is a very direct to purpose type of piece. And in fact, most of the advertising we do online, we try to control the offer as much as possible because we know how important that is. And so when pastors are going out with content, the issue is it's hard to come up with really good, authentic content, because that really is the key. I've seen plenty of content that's a person with an iPhone walking through the woods, and people are just loving this thing because it's meaningful, it's deep, it's real, it's creating that connection, and that's what we have. It's hard. Larry and I shot a number of videos a while back that were out to pastors, that were some educational videos, and I think of myself as generally personable until apparently you point a camera at me, and everything got lost. It was all lost in translation. I looked angry and I'm trying to read the teleprompter, and it was bad, and we just canned the whole. Larry's looked great, so we kept him. So some people have that camera charisma, some people don't, and that's a challenge. One of the things that we have used in the past, and we were actually going to be doing with you all at Called, was to start creating these welcome videos, just to create a 15-second video, and any one of you can do this in any environment, and we would love to have access to it. And I'll work a script and start getting them out to people. But it's just a video that says, thank you so much for registering. We are so excited that you're going to be joining us. You're looking them in the eye on a camera, saying that you're expecting them, but you're saying it in a positive way. You're saying the value of it, so they get to know you for a second. They also hear that you're expecting them. There's a human response to someone looking you in the eye and telling you they have an expectation of you. So it's going to increase the participation levels. Because right now, you get an email that says, thanks for showing up. You're like, whatever. But when someone looks you in the face and says, man, this is meaningful that you and I are going to connect, you're like, I guess I better be there, So
it can really add another piece to that.
Tools as ways to do that. And there's a way to create a generic enough script that we could apply it to almost any one of your meetings or your different things, and then just use it as a backdrop. As soon as they register, they get that.
To speak to one of the other questions that Larry brought up was, how do we get decisions if people are online? I think it's possible if we were to have like a digital response card that pops up online somehow that people can click boxes and respond to and get sent back in. I believe something like that has been done in the past, but we would need to have a way to have digital response cards, because information is good, but information that is acted on is what actually changes lives. Right. And that's where we have to go. We can talk about all the content and all the information and, just kind of fire hydrant people with all this great information. But at the end of the day, what we really want is to understand is, how are you interacting with this? How are you responding to this? And what changes are you thinking about making in your life because of what you've heard? So if there's a way to do a digital response card and actually get real-time digital responses from people online, that's what we need to do.
I think
Byron, one of the things that we've done is, Pastor's Line is a company that it's a text messaging service. And one of the things that we've done is, and you see this on on some of the shows today, some of the live shows, American Idol, things like that, where people can text to a number, their response. And what's really cool is, you can have them text this to this number, and you on the front end have automated a lot of the response. So that's how I do a lot of my registration now, where, they text this to welcome, or text this, text prophecy to this number. And it sends them through prompts, welcome, we're glad you're here. Could you give us your name? And then the next prompt is, can we get your email? And then the next prompt is, and then they send them a prompt once a week where they're like, I'm praying for you. And so, and I'm not doing any of that. It's all organized prompts. I can have access to it. I see all the information, but you can do that with surveys. You can do that with decisions. I've made appeals using that text messaging service. So that is kind of another neat element that you can incorporate into this online digital that we found to work pretty well.
Absolutely. Text in Church is another service almost identical to that. And they actually do create digital response cards. for specific, for specific church events, but you can modify those to meet your
It was called Text in Church.
Text in Church.
And what was the one you mentioned, Richie?
It's called Pastor's Line. Pastor's Line.
All right. Let me ask you this question. Ann alluded to this, talked a little bit about it. So did Richie. How do evangelistic presentations need to change in order to work online?
I think they need to be shorter to the point, maybe drive to a larger message. But man, I would love to see it. I think the full message needs to be shorter. And I think that the main message that we use to advertise and use for paid advertisement, if you so choose, is a short, condensed teaser of that bigger message. But that's my biggest thing, is it needs to look professional. It needs to have good content, but it's got to be short and to the point. We have less attention span than ever before. And if you're going to capture people in this digital age, man, you have got to do it in the first few seconds.
Yeah, true.
I agree with that. I think that it needs to be short, but I think that short can mean as long as 20 minutes, maybe even 30. That's a maximum. I think if you're going past that, people are going to start dropping out pretty fast. If the content is very, very interesting and people want to hear it, they'll stay with you till they get a picture of what you're saying. Secondly, I think that it can't be a preaching style. It has to be more of a teaching, like a conversational style, as though you're doing a one-on-one Bible study with somebody, because that's what you're doing. It's a different dynamic when you're doing a webinar. You know that there are a number of people listening, but you also know it's each one sitting by his computer, so they're not getting the feel of a group. As they don't get the group dynamic that you get in a live series. So I think that the presenter has to remember that and not preach it, but teach it or tell it. Show it.
I agree with that to a point, but yet I also think as God has gifted us differently, we've got to employ what God has gifted us with. And I think when you look at some of the great preachers, and I totally get it, we are a personality-driven culture, and I think it's hurt us more than it's helped us. But I do think I think this is for everybody, and I think that there are going to be some phenomenal online content that's more teaching style, and as there is phenomenal content online that's preaching style, and right. So I think there is room for both, because some people are attracted to the teaching. I'll be honest. I don't have any interest to hear somebody talk to me. If I want to hear someone talk to me, I'll go somewhere. When I go to church, I want to hear someone preach. That's just the way I am. That's what I'm drawn to. And obviously our views of what preaching is very different. But I think that's something we've got to consider. So I see completely what you're saying, but I think it really depends on the person, that they need to fight in their own armor and do what that really resonates with them. And I think it'll reach a group of people that are not reached through the preaching will be reached for the teaching. And those who are not reached through the teaching will be reached through the preaching.
Well, part of what I'm saying is not just preaching style, presentation style, but also that need to be interactive, that there must be the recognition that you don't have a group dynamic when you're presenting on a webinar. You have to be constantly asking a question, drawing them out, making sure that there's some kind of, you realize that you're interacting with a person, because it's on a screen.
Yeah.
And it may be a recording. Yeah. It may be that this isn't a live stream thing that they're listening to. This may be something that you recorded last year. So there has to be that personal element somewhere in that. Whatever one style of presentation, I think that there still has to be that very intentional drawing out of the person, so that they hear what you're saying as being to them.
Yeah, and that's for like a webinar format. That doesn't mean that's the only format available.
Of course.
Certainly a preaching format could be used, but it would be a little bit different dynamic, maybe a little bit different advertising and so forth. But what we have had success with is just that personal, working within our giftedness, that personal webinar where people are feeling a connection with you because, hey, they're in the privacy of their own home and you're just speaking right to their heart. And it does give them an opportunity to respond.
So
Right.
on that, yeah, I was just gonna, we've talked about it would need to be shorter, and I agree with that. I do think, and I was gonna ask, what do you think short means in the digital world, and kind of spoke to that. So do you think it would work to take like a 45, 50-minute presentation and just break it up into 3 different segments?
Well, I think you'd have to design your presentation so that it could be done that way. But yes, I do think that it could be done. I personally do think that it could be done. And again, I think that it depends sort of on what you're trying to achieve. And I think it'd be worth trying all kinds of things. A 5-minute snip, a 20-minute Bible study, an hour-long sermon type presentation, and just use it all. Use all the modalities, that to not restrict ourselves, say, well, we can only do short. We do some long too, but I think that the bulk of what we do should probably be shorter. Yeah,
shorter has definitely been more successful. People drop out. If you had a 45-minute sermon and each 15-minute segment of that was really compelling, then you could break that 45-minute sermon into 3 different segments. But usually with the sermon, there's building, there's maybe slower times, there's faster times, especially in what would be considered a longer sermon today of 45 minutes. So if you can take a 45-minute sermon and edit it and distill it down into the best of the best and make even 2 15-minute presentations, I think it would be more profitable for that than it would be to just go with a 45 minutes.
I'm thinking you might get a 15-minute segment and then 3 or 4 or 5, 2 or 3 minute segments out of a sermon.
You could do that too.
Well, all right, everybody, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for taking the last hour and just sharing your perspective, your wisdom. Let me wrap it up with a prayer here. Lord God, we are here to serve you. And you've called us to share this message of hope and wholeness, to share your good news into a world that's hurting. Lord, I pray that you'll take this conversation, take the seeds that have been planted, and just turn it into something fruitful that we can share with churches. I pray for a blessing on every church that's represented here. I pray for the churches that had planned to do meetings, and that you'll give each speaker wisdom on how to proceed and move forward. Lord, most of all, I pray that your name is lifted up and that you're honored through everything that happens in our lives and in each person represented on this call. I pray this all in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Hey, thank you, Larry.
For hosting.
All right, thanks, guys.
So much for hosting.
Bye-bye.
Blessings to everybody.
You too.
Bye-bye.
God bless.